The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network.
There were a lot of times where he was like, hey man, I was in this same position making the same decision, and here's where I felt like I went wrong. Just that wisdom and that advice was more valuable than anything else he could have brought. There's been a lot of times when he just kind of grabbed me and been like, hey, look, it's all right. I've been through this. It's not as big a deal as you think it is.
For a solid year, Neil Aresman was it when it came to the new wrestling program at Little Rock. He was every coach, he was every recruiting coordinator, he ran every errand that needed to be run. He did all this while waiting for the completion of his offices and the new wrestling facility, with a wife and 3, soon-to-be 4, kids at home. It might have been the busiest year of his life, but when it came time to hire an assistant coach, there were over 4 dozen candidates interviewed. Some of them were close friends from his time at Oklahoma State. Others were coaches who were looking for upward mobility within the Division I ranks and a good paycheck. Then there were the ones who really had a passion for coaching. But ultimately, one candidate stood out above the rest. Coach Aresman wasn't just hiring an assistant coach. He was hiring the other part of his staff that would create the coaching unit to pilot Little Rock Wrestling into its maiden wrestling season. Remember the situation when Little Rock hired Aresman to be their head coach? Did they go for the high-profile national champion, the seasoned Division I assistant, or the sexy name hire? They went with a guy who had a passion to build and a passion to teach. Aresman did the same thing when he selected Javier Maldonado to be Little Rock's first assistant wrestling coach. Welcome to Rocked Up, the story of the foundation and formation of the first Division I college wrestling program in Arkansas, starting in November of 2019 at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. This is the 10th edition of the story. We started this journey developing the foundation of wrestling in the state of Arkansas, and now we've moved on to the formation of the team, because to tell the full story of this program, you have to start at the very beginning. In 2018-2019, Javier Maldonado was the head coach at Southeastern University in Lakeland, Florida, leading the team to its second straight top 20 finish at the NAIA National Championships. Southeastern was the first varsity college wrestling program in the state of Florida in nearly 3 decades. The school put an emphasis on wrestling and building the profile of the sport and the school, and doing it with one of their native sons. But before we even hire Javier Maldonado at Little Rock, we have to go back in time. We have to figure out what Coach Aresman's timeline was for hiring an assistant coach in year 1.
So we started the hiring process about a year after I was hired. About a month after Nationals, we opened the job. And then about a month later, in May, we started doing phone interviews. I believe we brought Javi and the other candidates in, late May, early June, and then decided on an assistant and landed with Javi.
The coaching tree at Oklahoma State runs pretty deep. That's not just for head coaches, but assistant coaches as well. Several former teammates and several former Oklahoma State Cowboys came in and interviewed for the assistant position. Based on Little Rock's connections to Stillwater, it almost seemed like it was assuredly going to go to an Oklahoma State alum.
I took the approach that I was going to see, who fit us the best and who fit me the best. Someone who didn't necessarily have the same personality as me, that had a lot of grit, that had just was able to get down and get dirty and work hard. I definitely was reaching out to some of my former teammates, some of my former coaches, putting feelers out for everybody. And I just quickly learned that while it would have been great to have another Cowboy here, that it wasn't necessarily always the best fit. And I needed someone who believed in what we were doing, who was following along and not just waiting for a phone call. Anybody who started the conversation with how much, I pretty much went on to the next. I wanted someone who believed in doing something from the start, who believed in doing something for the first time, and the fact that this was a process and we wanted to build a foundation correctly and on a firm foundation, on a foundation of rock. And as I went through the process, I quickly eliminated, people that were friends and people that I knew well. It became very clear that I needed someone that really embodied grit and that believed in what we were doing and was wanting the job, that was calling me, that was texting me, that was, really doing what they could to get their foot in the door, which is kind of what I did here at Little Rock. And so when the time came to be able to bring on-campus interviews, I mean, Javi was a no-brainer. He was my first candidate I wanted to bring in, and when it came down to it, I knew he was the one I wanted.
Before we get to coaching strategy and team dynamics, let's find out exactly the background of Javier Maldonado.
So I was first exposed to the sport by actually my brother. He had a friend that was pretty good. He was a state placer in wrestling, and he brought my brother to wrestling, and my brother started wrestling, and then I was kind of on the fence about it, and then I come around end of my 8th grade year, I just realized that I wasn't going to be a basketball player, so I decided to start wrestling. So I started wrestling really seriously, went to a couple club practices with my brother at about 8th grade, but then I really started wrestling my freshman year in high school.
Maldonado kind of buries the lead here, as his mother plays a key role in him furthering his wrestling career.
My brother started wrestling. My mom started dating the wrestling coach, Jim Bird, and they got married. So he's technically my stepfather. And and once they started dating, and I started wrestling.
Maldonado found success wrestling in high school, where he was a 2-time state champion in Florida at Kissimmee Osceola High School, which was quickly becoming a force not just in the state, but in the Southeast. College programs were starting to notice wrestlers from the school. But the state of Florida, when Maldonado was coming through high school, lacked a varsity wrestling program. No NCAA Division I, II, or III, no NAIA, no junior college. Just a relatively organized club team at the University of Central Florida. So to wrestle Division I at the sport's highest level, Maldonado chose the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga in the Southern Conference.
It was the right fit. I fell in love with the town. I fell in love with the coaches. Terry Brands recruited me with Heath Esslinger, and I thought it was a right fit for me. And I believed in the program. I believed what Coach Brands was doing. I believed in the city. I fell in love with the city. I thought the city was awesome. And it was probably the best decision I made, just knowing, all the relationship I received or earned while being there, and the relationships that helped me get to where I am today.
What Maldonado explains is one of the benefits of college sports. He developed a passion for coaching and a desire to teach. While growing up in a household with a wrestling coach, some of those things might be learned behaviors. It also could have been something he's born with.
So I knew I wanted to be a teacher and coach. If it wasn't for teachers and coaches in my life, I wouldn't be where I'm at. If it wasn't for a wrestling coach or a teacher to say, hey, you're smart enough to do this, you can go to college. Then I don't know where I would have been. I just felt called to be a teacher or to teacher coach. I loved it. I loved wrestling. I loved the competition of it. I like training. So I've always really knew I wanted to be a teacher. I remember having a conversation with my counselor or one of my deans about my junior year saying, yeah, I want to be a teacher, just because of the impact that you can have on kids like me,
The mission of college athletics is not to produce teachers and coaches, but it becomes a pipeline for the next generation of college students to fill the rosters of those respective sports around the country. As we've mentioned in other episodes, it's the relationship with the coach that can sometimes steer an athlete in a direction towards a certain school. What coaches in Arkansas are waiting for is that next generation of college wrestlers in the state that have been wrestling at programs like Ouachita Baptist or Central Baptist or Williams Baptist or University of the Ozarks to come back and start teaching in Arkansas, creating another generation of college-ready student athletes that will only help raise the bar not just for the wrestling, but the level of college students going into Arkansas schools. Maldonado's home state now has 3 varsity wrestling programs, all in the NAIA. Southeastern University, which you'll hear about here in a moment, Kaiser University, and St. Thomas University, which just recently announced it was starting a program in the 2020-2021 season.
It's difficult. So here's my theory on it, or my outlook on it, is, when you don't have college wrestling in the state, you don't have something right in front of you that you can be like, well, that's what I want to do. If I can't go watch college wrestling, I didn't know I can wrestle in college until about my sophomore year, until my sophomore year. I was like, oh wait, I can wrestle in college. Sophomore, junior year, I was like, hey, I can wrestle. But if I probably would have saw it a little bit earlier, being talked about in the newspaper, in the news, college wrestling, even half of what college football is in Florida, there'll be other people that would pick up on the sport, I think.
The life of an assistant coach is often a transient one, from place to place looking for that job. Well, Maldonado didn't come right out of the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga with a spot waiting for him at Little Rock. He crisscrossed the country.
So I stayed there. Yeah, I stayed a year, and the coach was Chris Bono, and he kept me around. I trained for a year and was a grad assistant there. And then my girlfriend at the time, my future wife, was getting her master's in New Mexico State. So after the year at Chattanooga, Chris Bono left, so I left to New Mexico to start working, and I became a coach there. I actually got to coach at the local high school. You know, we had a state champ, a 3-time state champ that I helped coach his senior year. You know, he placed at NSSCA seniors and actually wrestled at the Citadel. And he was probably one of the first guys I really got to mentor / coach, you know, through in the journey and help him get into college and stuff like that. And I fell in love with it. So after that, after a year there, my wife was starting to finish up. So I didn't get a full-time job there. I couldn't get hired in the school as a full-time teacher. I had my degree and everything. They just didn't have a spot for me. That's when I went back home and started teaching and coaching at my Osceola High School with my dad.
One thing Arkansas and Florida had in common 10 years ago was no college wrestling programs. One thing they didn't have in common 10 years ago was Arkansas didn't even have high school wrestling programs. Florida high school wrestling was not a barren wasteland by any means. They just lacked college teams. That is until 2015, when Southeastern University in Lakeland, Florida, started a varsity wrestling program at the NAIA level. They hired Javier Maldonado to be the program's first head coach. In the program's second season, they had the school's first All-American. In the third, they finished 11th in the country. They became a formidable dual meet team, competing at the NAIA National Duels. Like Erisman, Maldonado had to build a program from scratch.
You got to work hard. I mean, you really got to hustle to get guys on the team and on short notice. Kind of, you got to learn how to recruit to where there's no traditions, there's no alumni that's gonna, you know, that you can point at and be like, here's what we're gonna do. You know what I mean? It's already been done. So you learn how to show the dream, the vision, your vision, what you want to do, and then the cool part about it is that you find the athletes that want to make that happen.
The things that Maldonado had to do as a head coach of a brand new program at Southeastern are the same things Erisman has been going through at Little Rock.
I didn't have to change anything. I didn't have to change a culture. You get to build a culture, and then just learning how to do a schedule, how to be smart with the schedule. It's not like, all right, well, we already got guys that are national qualifiers. We can go right away and wrestle anyone and everyone. Now, you know, you got to build a schedule that's smart, that's beneficial to the guys, and, you know, that's competitive. So I think those two things were some things I took away from starting SEU, and really the third thing would be just getting out in the community and letting people know about it. You know, you got to say, hey man, we're starting a brand new program. Hey, you know, we'd love to have you. Hey, especially with some people that don't even know what wrestling is, you know, and get them engaged and let them see your vision in your program.
So we have two commonalities. We have Neil Erisman building a program from scratch at Little Rock, and Javier Maldonado, who's built a program from scratch at Southeastern. Another similarity, Neil Erisman was an Oklahoma State Cowboy. Maldonado was a Kissimmee Osceola Cowboy, although they spell their Cowboys with a K for some reason. But from Erisman's perspective, when did Maldonado start to enter the fray? How does this NAIA coach infiltrate Division I wrestling coaching?
We were at Nationals after the FCA breakfast. He came up to me and grabbed me, and I had spoke to him at the convention, you know, I don't know, 7 or 8 months before that, and said, hey, I'm not hiring anyone for a year, but, you know, I'll let you know. And then he approached me, or after the FCA breakfast, and he was just asking a lot of questions, and I was kind of wanting to test him and see how bad he really wanted it. So I didn't necessarily paint a great picture. I just said, hey, this is what it is. This is what we got. This is who we are. If you're not willing to be this type of person and this type of coach and be the person that bumps head with everybody in the country recruiting, this job isn't for you. And he really took to that, and it excited him. And so I was like, all right, I definitely got to give this guy a shot. I gotta check him out, because he's still fired up after I even kind of gave him a little, you know, a pep talk about some things that didn't necessarily shed good light. It was trying to get him to understand the grit it was going to take to come coach here and to come recruit here in the beginning, just being brand new. And it fired him up and got him excited. And that's what really turned me on to it.
Erzman said he tried to paint a little bit of a different picture, make sure Maldonado was ready. Maldonado sees it slightly differently.
I think he tried to scare me away, and I was like, no, I'm still interested. Then he brought me in for an interview. That was it. I kind of, my wife didn't get to come. It just didn't work out. So, it was almost like, oh, that's not a good sign, But then I got here, and I kind of, just got here, and I felt at peace. It was a place that I can live. I can see my kids growing up here. Little Rock is a pretty area. I didn't know much about Arkansas before this. So I was like, all right, I'm going to go and see what's going on. Is this somewhere I can see myself living?
One thing Maldonado's learned about his career and his life, happy wife, happy life. So he had a little bit of selling to do.
I got here and I called my wife right away and was like, hey, this place is pretty. It reminded me a lot of Chattanooga area, because people are like, well, you moved from Florida. This has to be a big change. It's like, no, me and my wife spent some time at Chattanooga. So, I think the city, the outdoors element of it, the bluffs, the beautiful, scenery and the slower pace of life, slower way of life around in the South. It is a change from Florida, but we're used to it. Then I got here, I interviewed, I got back home, I was like, I want this job, and then my wife's like, okay, well, we'll see. And then I was like, well, let's give it a week to see if I still feel this way, take the emotions out of it, stuff like that. So once I took the emotions out of it and a week went by and I was like, I still want the job. So after that, I just waited for him to call me, and he called and told me the details and said he wanted to hire me, and I said, I'm in.
Building a program from scratch isn't necessarily something a college coach will put on their resume. In a world concerned with wins and losses, startup programs typically don't win a whole lot of matches. But when a startup is hiring, startup experience wasn't necessary, but it was definitely encouraged.
Everyone knows he started a brand new program, and that was a big, like, hey, this guy's been through it. He's actually a little bit older than me, a few years older than me, so he has a couple more years of experience. And the big question was, can you go from being a head coach to assistant? And I learned really quickly that his background of being a high school coach and starting an NAI program from scratch and wrestling for the best in the country, and someone who's, who has great character he worked with before, he kind of was the whole package. He had great connections. The minute that everyone found out that I was even talking to him, I was getting texts and calls, phone calls on his behalf saying, hey, listen, he's everything he says he is plus more. You're not going to go wrong with him. He's a loyal dude. And I think that really came from his very, very broad background, like you said. I mean, it's not easy being a high school coach. And it's not easy starting a NAI program where, I don't even know if he had an assistant for his first couple of years. And so his background really fit Little Rock. We're not a Power 5 school where, everything's fancy and this and that. Our building's fancy, I'll say that much. But, we're a smaller university, and I just think he, coming from Florida, he had a lot of great connections in the Southeast, and he just brought a really, really good mindset and attitude and mentality to our program.
Southeastern begins the 2019-20 season in its fifth year. Some of those seniors were Maldonado's first recruits, making the decision to leave that much more difficult.
So the decision to leave, it was hard. The guys are there are the seniors, the fifth-year seniors, the guy that stayed the whole time, that are graduating. That core group with a couple guys that came in right after them. Now it was hard to leave because they're very competitive right now. And we also got a very good freshman recruiting class of guys that were finally like wanting to wrestle at SCU, that were wearing SCU wrestling shirts, that knew SCU. And then, so it was a hard decision. I love the program. I love, the people I worked with and everything like that. But I just felt like, I've had some other opportunities for interviews at the Division I level, and I just felt that it was the right fit for me to accept the job. My kids weren't getting any younger. I'm not getting any younger. They're starting, my son started kindergarten, and, there's a lot of things you got to think about before you take a job, when your wife and your kids are involved also, it's a family decision. So the timing was right. And, I saw the opportunity of what this place could be, which with the support and I thought the right guys were here. The people that were building this program, Mr. Hatcher, Neil, Chase, all those guys are successful people. They care about people too, as well. So, I was like, well, if those guys are behind this, this place is going to be all right. And I think that's one of the reasons I decided to make the decision then.
Ayersman's even discovered a few things Maldonado brought to the table that even he wasn't expecting.
I knew he was super organized. I knew he was a detailed guy. I knew that he was likable. He passes the eye test as far as sending someone into, a recruit's house. And I think the big thing is that he understood what it was like to be in my position and be the head coach. Sometimes that loneliness it feels where everything seems like it's on your shoulders no matter what. And unless you're in charge, you don't quite fully understand that. And so he's just supported me in my role, and he makes sure that everything that he does reflects good on me. And that's something I noticed that I really didn't know, how that was going to go down. It was just kind of something that I expected and we would work through it. But he has been unbelievable when it comes to speaking the same language that I speak, and supporting me and having my back, and always doing whatever he can to prop me up as the head coach. And I know that might sound like that's not coming from this, like I expected that from him. That was something that just kind of caught me off guard, that I appreciated more than I knew. And it was something I needed. And it gave me a lot of encouragement and just that support that I think every head coach needs.
Recruits, check. First wrestlers, check. First recruiting class, check. First assistant coach, check. Someone to share an office space with and actually have a conversation in the morning, check.
Being by yourself for a year and recruiting and talking to people, you don't think about anybody else besides the program and really what you're trying to accomplish. I think I had to really start saying we instead of I. I think that was a big transition. But he's super laid back. He's always honest, and I can have hard conversations with him. So the transition of having an assistant coach was, one, a huge relief, and it was exactly what I needed. I needed someone who could have those hard conversations, who could challenge me, but I know at the end of the day, they always have my back, and that's what Javi does. He has my back every day, all day, and he's constantly fighting to win.
There's also one thing Ayersman's looking forward to now that he has another able-bodied wrestling coach at his disposal. It's having a day off from actually wrestling.
Man, my body was hurting after a year of wrestling every day, all day. Just to have a day where I don't wrestle and I just coach is pretty awesome. But it's also awesome from the standpoint that I get to keep my eyes on everybody. I don't just try to wrestle and see what's going on out of the corner of my eye. I get to take a step back and really see who and what my guys are every single day, and that's been a huge relief.
For Maldonado, he's channeling his inner Yogi Berra, as it's deja vu all over again as he gets to start another program from scratch.
Yeah, it is. It is deja vu all over again, and there's not much differences. I would say the biggest difference, I'm still showing the same single leg I showed at the NAI level, so it's not a technique, it's not nothing like that. I would say the biggest difference is the recruiting. The recruiting is a lot faster, and you can honestly miss out on a kid if you don't start early, or if you don't, get on them early, or if you miss one weekend of, hey, we can't do this recruiting trip on this weekend, we got to wait till next weekend, you can miss out on that kid because of that, So I would say that the difference is the recruiting wise, it's a lot faster. Just like SU, people are excited about the competition here. I remember when I first moved here, we did a couple things in the community. We gave away some boxes that we were doing, and people came and picked up some boxes from the house. And, I had my Little Rock wrestling shirt. I was like, yeah, you guys are starring. He didn't know that his kids don't wrestle, but they knew about it and they were excited about it. And they were like, hey, that's awesome. we love Little Rock, and we're excited to see them, add another program.
With the hiring of Javier Maldonado, that left an opening at Southeastern University, which was filled by Anthony George, Maldonado's assistant coach. But wrestling coaches aren't the only ones to shift jobs. Athletic administration changes as well. And Chase Conk and Molly Castor, two administrators who you heard from earlier in the series, are no longer at Little Rock. They took jobs at the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley. On the next episode of Rocked Up, we'll hear from George Lee, the new director of athletics at Little Rock, and get his perspective on starting this program from scratch. Rocked Up is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network and can be found on the web at getrockedup.com or on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or wherever fine podcasts are found. For more wrestling-specific podcasts, check out matttalkonline.com. If you like the show and want to support it, leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/MattTalkOnline.